Hi, I'm Matthew Jenusaitis, and I've done a lot of presentations, and you kind of develop a few general rules that you use when giving a presentation. Rule 101 is you don't really want to follow the senior advisor to two presidents. It's generally a tough slot to fill. But the nice thing is John's presentation dovetails very nicely into the things that I want to say. In 1961, Christian Barnard, the heart surgeon in South Africa, performed the first heart transplant. And it was a great thing, And so he wanted to talk about it and publicize it. So he embarked on a speaking tour around the world. And he was in Europe, and he was doing this speaking tour in Europe, and he hired a chauffeur and a car to drive him from Frankfurt to Munich and Vienna, and then kind of through southern Europe, and then back through northern Europe. And he did this presentation over and over again for like 2.5 months. And so now it's like getting to be the end of the second month, and he's tired of doing the presentation, and it's the same chauffeur, and he's talking to him, and he goes, I am just so sick of giving this presentation, and I just hate it. And he goes, why don't we switch clothes? They don't know who you are, they don't know who I am. You've seen the presentation a lot. Let's just switch clothes. You get up there, you give the presentation, I'll stay in the back of the room. And the chauffeur said, whatever, okay. So the chauffeur gets up there, and he's in front of this room of, a couple hundred people, and he's doing the presentation, slide by slide, and he's getting it just dead nuts. He's seen it 20 times before, and he's just got it. And then he starts taking questions from the audience. And he's doing a great job fielding the questions because he had heard them all before. And he's answering them, and everybody's just really impressed with this chauffeur that's standing up. And Christian Barnard's in the back of the room. And so finally somebody asked him this one question. What do you think the socioeconomic impact of this procedure is going to have on the medical industry? And the chauffeur's like, oh my God, I never heard this question. He had no idea. And he looks at the guy, and he's standing up there, and he's like, I'm surprised. That is the stupidest question that I have ever heard in my life. He goes, it's such a stupid question, I'm going to have my chauffeur answer it in the back of the room. And the bottom line is, with all of this, is I'm just a chauffeur. I've been very fortunate in my life and my career that I've seen a lot of things, and I've been around a lot of smart people. So really what I wanted to do is share with you some of the things that I've picked up along the way. I've been in the medical business for 25 years. And over that 25 years, I've literally seen thousands of presentations on product proposals, strategic plans, project initiatives. And some of them have been great. A lot of them have been good. Some of them have been very disastrous. But all of them have been memorable. And over that period of time, I've come to formulate a few postulates as to what really separates the distinguished few from the mediocre many. And the common element that I've found is really the same reason that unites us all here at TEDxFullerton. It's creativity. And so a lot has been written about creativity. Jim Collins, who I think most of you guys know who he is a Stanford professor, and he wrote these series of books, Good versus Great and Built to Last. And he talks about humility of leadership and passion. And some people say you need to focus on your strengths and mitigate the weaknesses. Other people say you need to have mental discipline and focus. The thing that I would propose, and in my experience and what I've seen most often, is creativity is really the one element in business that truly distinguishes the good from the great. So I spent some time trying to figure out, well, what are the characteristics of creative people? And tons and tons have been written about this. And, I tried to boil it down to a list that I thought kind of summarized and was also commensurate with my experience. And the first thing that I think resonates with everybody is creative people are curious. They like to play with ideas. They like to play with things. Second thing is creative people tend to be very risk tolerant. They tend to not get bogged down with the ramifications of failure, but rather focus on the opportunities associated with success. Creative people also tend to be kind of humorous. They tend to find the funny parts of even the darkest situations. John referenced Einstein. Creative people tend to be very extroverted, but they also have this incredible ability to focus. I was thinking during his presentation that, there's a story about Einstein that he liked to sit at these big family gatherings, and he'd be surrounded with a room of people talking and gabbing, and he would sit on the couch and he could mentally focus and kind of tune the rest of the world out, still be in a very extroverted environment, but had this ability to focus. I'm married to a very creative person, and I think that anybody that has a creative spouse knows that creative people can be critical. But the good thing is, and this is the case with my wife, they do it in a very constructive way. They tend to keep the end goal in mind. I think creative people, in my experience, and also from what I've written or what I've read, are also very emotionally sensitive. They have well-developed EQs. And I think the biggest thing that resonated in everything that I've read and everything that I've come to learn through my experiences is that creative people are slower. Now, that's not to say that they're slower in an intellectual way, because I think from an intellectual perspective, creative people are just as smart or smarter than everybody else, but they take longer with things. They tend to utilize the time that they have available. They tend to play around with things, and they get the most out of a situation. They tend not to rush into deadlines. I tried to figure out what are some tools that business people typically use to weave into the fabric of their organizations to inspire this kind of creative attitude. And there's three things that I came up with. And these are three tools that I've used. These are tools that I've seen used over and over again by these typically great organizations. First of all of these organizations embrace failure. They celebrate failure, and they use failure as a fabric to build on future successes. The second thing is, creative organizations and creative leaders recognize that diversity is something that they should celebrate and bring in. And that will expand their breadth of thought. And then lastly, creative organizations and leaders truly harness the power of collaboration. And one of the tools that we use a lot in business is lateral thinking, getting everybody in an organization moving in a similar direction. So this is the Patriot missile system. So the Patriot missile system was developed in 1976 by Raytheon. It was deployed for the first time in 1982. Since 1982, Raytheon has made about 10,000 of these systems. Deployed them in the US, sold them all over the world to the US allies. The Patriot missile, once it's launched, can travel at a speed of 5 times the speed of sound, can deliver a payload of 200 pounds of high explosives to a target area about a square meter. Okay? So I don't want to debate the pros and cons of the Patriot missile. And certainly I don't want to get into a discussion regarding the merits of our nuclear armament or our missile armament. But at the same time, the Patriot missile kind of illustrates this point of the importance of mistakes. When the launch coordinates are loaded into a Patriot missile or fed to the Patriot missile takes off and it gets on its trajectory. And then it measures its position relative to the ideal trajectory and position. And it makes a little correction based on that deviation. So it looks at its mistake and then makes a deviation. It's a little mistake and then it makes a deviation. And then it goes on and it measures again. Here's where I am, here's where I should be, I'm going to make a correction. And through a series of these little mistakes and corrections, the Patriot missile avoids making the biggest mistake of all, missing the target. So perhaps a more palatable example of mistakes that can lead to future successes, I think probably a lot of you guys remember the two children arguing about one getting peanut butter on the other's chocolate and one getting chocolate in the other's peanut butter. And in turn, these two little mistakes gave rise to a big success, the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup. This is probably one of the most famous examples of the importance of mistakes. And this is a picture of the first light bulb developed by Thomas Edison and William Hammer in Menlo Park, New Jersey in 1879. So Edison and Hammer were working on this light bulb. And the challenge was, people had developed electric light before, but nobody could figure out how to make it sustainable and develop a light bulb that would actually work over a long period of time. And the problem was the filament. So Edison and Hammer tried all these different filaments. You know, they tried platinum, they tried all kinds of other metals, and they kept failing. They couldn't get it right. Until finally Hammer came up with the idea, well, let's try carbon fibers, see how carbon fibers work. And then in 1879, in November, they tried this carbon fiber, and lo and behold, it worked. And they developed the light bulb. Edison patented it. In 1880, they started the Edison Electric Light Company. And the Edison Electric Light Company was one of the first utilities in Manhattan. And they lit up about 50 homes in lower Manhattan. So this was a cool company. And these little mistakes that they had with the light bulb formed this Edison Electric Light Company. Well, in 1890, the Edison Electric Light Company became Edison General Electric. And then in 1892, Edison General Electric merged with another company and became General Electric. And in 2010, General Electric is the second largest company in the world and employs 300,000 people. So these little mistakes that were made in 1879 have given rise to one of the biggest, largest corporations in the world. And the moral of the story is, when you celebrate little mistakes and you utilize those as a platform for future learning, things work out great. On the other hand, when you suppress mistakes, they ferment and they become bigger problems. So the key thing to take out of it is mistakes are important, and you need to build organizations that celebrate them. So I talked about fermentation. I love wine. I love to drink wine. I'm a Bacchanalian decadent. I mean, I just will drink and drink. So winemakers in France have this whole diversity of ingredients philosophy. They tend to blend grapes together in order to create the best wines. And I drink a lot of red wines, and there's 5 noble grapes in red wines. There's Cabernet Sauvignon, Pinot Noir, Merlot, Petit Verdot, and Cabernet Franc. Those are the 5 noble grapes, and the French winemakers tend to work with those 5 grapes. And they blend them together to unlock the flavors of the wine. It hits your palate in different places. You know, one of the things you notice about really good wines is when you take a sip, it hits your mouth in all different places. You'll get it on the sides, you'll get it in the top of the roof of your mouth, you'll get it on your tongue, the front and the back. Whereas when you drink kind of less sophisticated wines, it'll taste good. You know, it's alcoholic grape juice, and it goes down fine. American winemakers in the last 20 years have started to pick this up as well. You know, they have the Meritage wines, or if you want to give it the French accent, some people say Meritage. But I think it's actually the combination of the word marriage and heritage. And it relates to this diversity of ingredients. And you put these different things together, and you create a more palatable wine. Well, that same philosophy applies in business. And probably the most common way that people look at diversity of personalities in business is through the Myers-Briggs personality profile. Now, I don't want to debate the merits back and forth of personality profiling, but I've done this profile a lot over the years. And I have to say that it's incredibly predictable in terms of what my behavior is going to be like in a certain situation. Now, the important thing in a business situation is not to surround yourself with people that are exactly like you, because it really limits the breadth of thinking in any particular situation. And when you get in the interview process, you interview people for jobs, right? And you see somebody that's just like you, and narcissistically you go, I like that guy. He's good, right? But it's a common mistake that people make. You need to make sure that you incorporate diversity in your thinking, and it broadens out the breadth of what you can inject into the organization. So the last thing I want to talk about is collaboration. You know, a lot of you guys are probably familiar with this man on the moon exercise. You know, it's an exercise that they give to groups during team building where you're a survivor on the moon or you're a survivor in the jungle, and you have this list of 15 things. And you need to prioritize what are most important. And then everybody's asked to prioritize this list independently and then get together as a group and prioritize the list as a group. And then you compare your independent results and the group results versus what the experts say. And invariably, the group always does better. And so the moral of the story is collaboration is important. Well, in the late 60s, there was a physician in Malta, his name is Edward de Bono, published a book called Lateral Thinking and the Six Thinking Hats. And his postulate was that if you can channel the thinking of a group in a common direction, you'll greatly amplify the capabilities. And if you've ever done one of these pro and con exercises, you get a feeling for what that is. You know, you get a group together and you're trying to decide on a proposal. And you say, okay, well, what are all the pros? What are all the good things about this particular project? And you make a list. And then you say, well, what are the cons? And you make a list of all the cons. And then you match up the lists, and the cream kind of rises to the top, and you think, okay, that makes sense. Well, that's lateral thinking. And that's getting everybody in the group to think a common way at a common time, and then change direction, and everybody in the group thinks a common way that might be different from the first one, but you're working together. Well, Edward de Bono said you do this six different ways. In my experience, you maybe don't necessarily need 6, but you maybe need 2 or 3. And whatever decision you're trying to make or project that you're working on will usually dictate what those 2 or 3 ways are. But the bottom line is, if you get everybody thinking the same way, the collective horsepower of the team gets amplified. And that's the true value of collaboration. So what I've tried to do is detail why creativity is important in business and 3 of the common tools that people use to develop an organization or develop a group that embraces these creative components. First of all, you need to allow mistakes to become part of the fabric of your culture. And you need to celebrate mistakes and use those as a platform for future learning. Second, you need to incorporate a lot of diversity in the organization because that will expand your breadth of thinking. Third, you need to utilize lateral thinking to truly get the collaborative horsepower amplified in the organization. And in incorporating those 3 things, I think you have the ability to create organizations that will truly differentiate, like I mentioned earlier, the mediocre many from the distinguished few, and create organizations and teams that are good versus great. Thank you very much.